Well, hello everyone. Here to show you the coloring right here. The coloring activity so far is talk about with Matthew's Told Aircraft here. Basically talking about is a story from what I experienced about 5 years ago was, and of course from my childhood it was. And basically that you see right here is I went and drew right here is an example right here of an airplane it is. And with most people maybe think about if they if they been on an airplane before, or if maybe if they've seen them, of course, a couple of times in the sky. And most of my childhood that I can remember seeing airplanes in the sky, and just like that they were pretty loud. I can tell anybody that a couple of times that you see airplanes in the sky. It is that from where I lived those couple of years ago when I was very young. That it was in St. Charles, Missouri. It was, but I can remember that seeing a couple of airplanes in the sky. It was, and they were. I would say that they were at least maybe 2,000 or 3,000 feet. Say above in the sky. It was because they look like teeny tiny models. It was, and I can tell anybody how about. Whenever they were in the sky, that a lot of times I can hear them a lot of times, and they would you can hear the sound of their engine. It was, and seen them a couple times in the sky, and I also have I would say a few airplane models, such as this kind right here. It is, and I have with this airplane model right here, anybody probably think about I think an FT bomber or something like that is what this aircraft would be like, say a model aircraft. But I had planes like these. It is, and I also have like say an Air Hog right here, but just like with the Air Hog that have have right here. Say for the name is say the Titan it is, but other than that, this it was made out of what you call like the foam. It is like type of styrofoam it is, but it's something like that. Planes like this more likely is what I played with when I was very young. It was, and knowing about that, take it out, say in the front or backyard over there at the house where I used to live, and then just say throw it. It's like at the wind speed, just to be able to allow it to fly in the air. It was, but I could tell anybody here that my first experience getting on an airplane for the first time, and with anybody would probably think about, I'm like, yeah, that if you maybe grew up to where you had maybe toy airplanes, it was toy aircrafts, and knowing about that, getting on an airplane for the first time, just to go somewhere, or just to get on an airplane, just to enjoy maybe a flight, somewhere. It was a lot of times with anybody would you maybe think that if you get on an airplane for the first time, that what's it like, exactly. And knowing about though that with most of the time with airplanes though that I've seen them, of course, I've been to the airport I think a couple times. Whenever I was very young, I've been to the airport a couple times with my parents. It was, and knowing about we would be looking at got photos, and of course we be looking at the different aircrafts. It was, and talking about like if most of us have visited like what you call places like the St. Louis Science Center or something like that, to where that they would have like say examples of say talking about aircrafts. It was, and other museums. It was, and basically though that with aircraft, so that from my first experience getting on an airplane, that other than say of a toy aircraft, and that talking about like an aircraft kind of like this right here, is that you have is that from the looks of it is like I kept thinking about that you have right here is like is that the place where say the passengers will be able to sit at, and of course right here is the wingspan. It is, and of course you say the cockpit for where the pilots will be, and a place to where how the passengers can get in on the plane. It is, and it was like I can draw right here is that my first experience going to the airport. It was, and then it's like from the vacation, of course, say to Washington D.C. It was, is that nearly 5 years ago that my first experience of getting on an airplane for the first time. It was, and with anybody would maybe think that that just like maybe riding the bus, or just like what you call is like ride, just like maybe getting on what you call is like shuttle, ferry, your ferry ride or something like that, or maybe the what you call a triple decker, maybe a triple decker bus, whichever it is. But on the other hand, too, that knowing about with my experience of riding on an airplane, though, that I can tell anybody here that that it was like what you call, I may have mentioned before. It's like time travel. It was. I felt like time travel. That getting into like what you call is like a big aircraft. It was, and I could tell anybody here that I have dreams, of course, a couple times about maybe what it was like, to get on an airplane. It was, and then you've seen that a couple times in movies about people getting on airplanes. It was, and my first experience and about is it like maybe like something that you see on some of on those movies? It is like, well, kind of, but on the other hand, though, that from my first experience of getting on an airplane for the first time, it was of knowing about that I talking about, it's like that they give you a boarding pass. A lot of times that they give you a boarding pass to use to be able to get on board the plane. It is, and then they say that please fasten your seatbelts whenever the seatbelt light comes on, and then they want you to fasten your seatbelts, and then they have it to where right up above, you say the chair right up above the seat will be like what you call as fans. And I can draw an example too of like what you call like for fans. It is that they would have it to where that with these fans that there will be fans that you can turn off and on. And then I really don't know exactly about really what all they have on the aircraft. I even heard that they got phones, that you more likely, they say that you more likely have to pay for them, but that there's phones there that you can make calls with, whichever it is. But on the other hand, that my first experience getting on an airplane for the first time, and I can tell anybody here, anybody maybe think about, yeah, well, I experienced it totally different, because on the other hand too, it does not feel like what you call any type of point of time travel, or it does not feel like what you call is like riding on a subway. Anybody maybe think about between riding on what you call is like a subway or a metro or anything like that, you kind of get a totally different feeling. But I tell anybody here that I rode on the metro train at it's like when in St. Louis it was, and they had metros out there, and I have not really been on, let's say, the metros like maybe in places like Chicago or Detroit or whichever state it was. But on the other hand, that for first time getting on board an airplane, and I can remember that I it's like I was just not used to the fact about that I had luggage with me too, and with luggage, and then on the other hand, we went to the person, of course, to take care of with the luggage fee, because that was going to be shipped, on another through another flight. But I can remember that we got there, by the time we got through security, is that knowing about that we had about maybe close to an hour wait until we can get on board our flight. It was, but it was like that whenever we were, family and I were waiting at the airport, I can remember looking at the planes. They had about at least maybe 5 planes, parked, around a side part, of the terminal, and I kept looking at. I was looking at them, and it was just like my first experience going to the airport. I would probably say that my first experience, my first airplane ride ever, first time in my life that. Going to the airport and experiencing, seeing these planes, it's like how big they were, and knowing about that they're not these model planes like I used to have either. That have a couple of them now, but they're not like the model airplanes. That it's like anybody probably think about. Well, the model airplanes, of course, they may fly, maybe like any other airplane, but on your hand too, they're not really the same size. And on the other hand, that you don't have to worry about putting fuel, of course, inside the model airplanes either. But anyway, I think about talk about with foam, this foam, styrofoam type, plane right here, of talking about that you don't have to worry about putting fuel into it, and maybe checking the cabin pressure, and maybe making sure that it's got the right equipment, whichever it is, but But any day that, during the flight that I can remember that they were talking about is like if the plane tends to lose cabin pressure, that they have oxygen mask on there that they provide for you, that they say that that they come down, the oxygen mask come down, hold it hold it over your mouth, and then so for other passengers, and they come down, and then they tell you about what to do. It's like if the plane tends to lose cabin pressure, it was, but anyway, but you have using like working with say purple, but I can go and work with say with the blue, but anyway, that you have right here is the aircraft, and so far as Matthew's told, aircraft is this aircraft, which I went ahead and drew, just by what you call like drawing that, say the outer line part of it, of knowing about. With most people would probably think about that whenever they get on an airplane, they go on a vacation somewhere, that they may have their own opinions about it, whichever it is, and knowing about with most opinions though that they could maybe think about, it's just like riding a bus, but to me, I kind of experienced like maybe a few other different feelings also of knowing about getting on board the plane for the first time, and you're walking through like would say the entrance doors, and then from there, and then getting buckled into the seat, and then chewing gum. Anybody, a lot of people I think about that they suggest you chew gum so that way your ears don't pop, but it's like that getting on the airplane for the first time it was, and taking off. I can tell anybody here that I was kind of afraid about getting on board the airplane, that what's it like from whenever the plane takes off and then whenever it lands, and I could tell anybody could probably say about ever since September 11th, that more likely that they kind of avoided any type of air travel it was, but it's like that I kept thinking about, well, the aircrafts, and plus you say the amount of plane crashes, of course, that they report about per year, that would say with the plane designs it's like knowing about exactly whichever that caused it. It's like anybody if I think about that happens to some aircrafts that especially if they're going overseas, it is. And I don't know if they ever, I heard on the news a couple of times about the fact about some planes, of course, that were flying somewhere, maybe somewhere overseas, and then they never found them. Apparently that there was like what you call a transmitter or something like that inside the airplane. Of course, that they said that either the airplane was shot down or that it just disappeared nowhere, and then nobody knows exactly whatever happened to it. And at the time, anybody who does a lot of traveling, from state to state, country to country, or if it's from terminal to terminal, say for the airport it is, but knowing about that, getting on board the plane, of knowing about the safety regardation. But I would probably think about that. From my first experience, for whenever I got on the airplane, though, that a lot of times that I knew that more likely the pilots, it's like knew that basically they got their basic training, of course, about how to fly the airplane, and on the other hand too that from how the flight was, that they say you're prepared for takeoff and then to prepare for landing, but a lot of times you usually hear like prepare for takeoff, and then from there, and then while during the flight it was, and I anybody probably think I'm like that stories can go on and on just like almost all my other colorings, but I'll just say that if this was me right here, it is like to try to draw me right here. Go ahead and use the black right here, but anyway, to draw me right here, and let's just say that draw me if I was actually sitting down, and then it would be like what you call like assistant. It's like so far flight attendants. I guess you call them flight attendants. It is that that they would come to you during your flight. That they would a lot of times ask you if like hey, I'm like, would you like to have something to eat? Would you like to have a drink? It is, and for whatever reason, anybody maybe ask. I'm like, during your flight at all? I'm like, did you ask the flight attendant? You did not even want anything to drink, or did not even want anything to eat? It is, and I can tell anybody here that during the flight, though, that if I remember, yeah, I had gum in my mouth. It was, and then on the other hand, that I looked at enjoying the flight a little bit, maybe more concentrating, and of course a little bit more excited. But with anybody who maybe say like, well, you would think that after being on the plane, after being on the plane for at least maybe half an hour, you could have been thirsty from, you say, from waiting or something like that, and then they would ask you if you wanted something to drink. It was, and a lot of times, so it's like so far as assistance, so is that during the flight that if you want to go ahead and have something to drink, that they would make a drink for you, and then if you wanted something to snack on, it was, and a lot of times, during my flight, if anybody were to ask me about the airplane food, about the food they serve you, a lot of times, let's just say if it's like first class, it was, is that I have not really experienced about how the meal is served, or how what the meals are like, especially on an airplane. It is, but I'm assuming that more likely that it's they say that a couple times that there may be something that may not be cooked all that right, or something that maybe don't fit your appetite, whichever it is. But on the other hand too, other than that, they say that a lot of times for the most part the food's good on the other hand too. But so far with aircraft, so that with most of the time with most aircrafts, I can tell anybody here, it's been 5 years ago, and anybody maybe ask, I'm like, do you remember at all about the flight? If it was, from the St. Louis International Airport to the Ronald Reagan, International Airport, it was. I think it was the Ronald Reagan up there, Washington D.C. It was, and do you remember the flight it was? And I'm like, well, yeah. It's been 5 years, but I still remember, the details about getting on the plane and getting off the plane, and then I can remember, getting on the metro train after that, and so it's like my first experience getting on an airplane. That I could tell anybody here that if anybody was afraid to maybe get on, like, say, a roller coaster or a hot air balloon, anything that has to do with air travel, it was. About almost anything that has to do with air travel, that more likely that maybe a kid or somebody, teenager, whoever it is, that more likely is going to be afraid to get on an airplane, especially if they're going by themselves. It is, but it's like with most of the time with aircraft, so that if you I've always wanted to know about what it was like to get on an airplane, and tell anybody here that from where I was seated, it was that all I can really see, of course, was the engine, and the engine part of the plane. Looking into the window at about right here, it was, and go ahead and use right here as the blue crayon, but looking into, say, on the passenger side, which whenever I first got on board the plane, it was that I can remember that chewing gum, and then I can remember that I think there was a magazine, you say, on the seat that I was looking at also. But a lot of times I remember looking out the window a couple times, and I kept thinking to myself that during this vacation, I'm like, that during your flight, what exactly are you going to be doing? Are you going to be getting on your cell phone, or are you going to be maybe talking to people during the flight? It is, but I kept thinking about, well, more likely I'm going to go ahead and just be staring out the window, because I'm like, I'll tell anybody, well, this is my first time being on an airplane, so I'm kind of just trying to get used to it. And on the other hand too, that knowing about I even told somebody there at the airport those couple years ago, whenever I showed them my ID, whenever I showed them my driver's license, I remember I showed them my ID in order to be able to get on board the plane, of course, going through security. That I can remember I told them that this is my first and ever flight, and and she kind of, she didn't really look at me like, well, where have you been or where? She just kind of looked at me like, well, hope you enjoy your flight. It is. I'm like, she didn't give me that look like she was surprised or nothing. The flight, the airport attendant, basically just looked at me. It's like, oh, okay, well, you let me know how you enjoy it or something like that. And so, really, from what you tell anybody there at the airport, especially going, getting on the shuttle bus and and go to the airport, find a parking spot, and then getting off the airplane. It is our experience, though, of talking about with our experience, is it anything like what you call like having one of these model airplanes to where, have the experience of knowing about how to display something like this, and like talk about how to mount it on a dresser drawer or anything like that, and then knowing about how to display it. I like talking about, anybody maybe think about, that you talk about, any type of models or anything like that, how do they fly, and of course, how are they designed, and such and such. But I could tell anybody here that something like this is really what all I had, because back then, though, that airplane tickets, I know that the cost to get on an airplane, even back those couple years ago, I think even for like a family trip was something between maybe $400 or $500 or something like that, just for maybe about 3 or 4 passengers, just to be able to board the plane. It is, for wherever that they were going. It is. So my first airplane ride, I thought, in a lot of ways, was going to be about the fact about, that something that maybe I would have to save up for or something like that. But on your hand too, that knowing about that with any kind of aircraft, and I can tell anybody here that I'm also thinking about the time I have too. But anyway, a lot of the aircrafts I can remember seeing those couple years ago, look like this. If most of us know what I'm talking about, that you see them in the sky a lot of times. You hear, like, I guess some people call them like what you call like the sonic boom. It is that with aircrafts that you can hear them. You can see them in the sky. It is that they were about several distance it was, and you can also hear the sound of their engine like. But other than that, talk about here is like with the aircraft though, and with the aircraft that. When go ahead and draw a detail right here, it's like with the clouds. I'm like a lot of times, if I think about usually that they fly maybe above, sometimes above the clouds, but draw some clouds right here. It's like if they would be an actual airplane is in the sky. But anyway, I could tell anybody here that did it feel like maybe time travel? I'm like, that's usually what I say that about experience, about getting on an airplane for the first time. Did it feel kind of like time travel? And I can tell anybody that that's pretty much how it felt like. It felt like time travel, because really that with an airplane that I guess that whenever you go somewhere fast enough, that it feels like that if you go from the north or from the south within about maybe an hour, it feels like time travel, because anybody maybe think about that. Really, you see it on movies, you hear it on movies, it is, and you see it, but a lot of times it seems all like Hollywood. But there are some things that more likely we may experience in life that more likely that aren't too much Hollywood, such as anybody maybe think about so far with time travel. It is that time travel so far as going back in time to go ahead and correct whatever mistakes, of course, that were made. I'm like that don't even exist, but like for time travel, such as going like what you call from continent to continent, if like for the north and south, east and west, it is that it's like try to draw a compass right there. But anyway, north, south, east, and west. If you were like say the northeast or so, the northeast part of the country, or the southeast part to say of the continent, or going from country to country, it is that I guess that's more likely a time travel nowadays that exists, that they have it to where they between connected flights it is that you get on board an airplane, and then they say that maybe if you had to be in another country within about maybe 13 hours, and they said that that's no problem. But if you're talking about if you're flying from Nebraska to Tokyo, Japan, or something like that, and then they may say that it may take up to at least maybe between 12 to maybe to 22 hours or something like that. It's like with connector flights it is, because with anybody maybe think about that, that's usually how they do it. And I'm like, I don't know exactly how. I'm like, why it works like that. I'm thinking though that with it's 22 hours is quite a long time, of course, just to be flying, And even if you did have a direct flight, that you were getting on, that more likely that talk about where restroom breaks, and on the other hand too that the plane can only hold so much fuel. They may say that the plane can only hold so much fuel, and then knowing about that the arrangement is from how the weather, if the weather is going to be pretty bad coming in and coming out, it is that more likely though that the flight, that the plane's only going to be able to take you within maybe about 400 miles from where you took off from, and then where from you say from departing and of course arrival time it is. But anyway, but my parents could probably talk to me about airplane stories too. But so far as from what I can, it's like things from what I can remember. Of course, I can remember almost everything. Of course, from my experience. Of course, from getting on an airplane, I could probably tell anybody here that so far as my experience of flying one of these toy planes to getting on an actual plane, and anybody made me think about really that now, since you've been on an airplane before, I guess that an airplane talking about an airplane that actually flies compared to one of these toy airplanes, it is. If anybody might think about, it's like that. Really, that does it feel kind of like with anybody? It's like this is. The only airplane I really have that talks about it's like so far as the feeling, but so far as you have this this feeling right here to where the plane kind of does this a little bit and it goes from side to side. It is side to side, and then that goes from the left to the right. And with anybody would maybe think about, I'm like, that with most planes though that it feels, from what I experience, you kind of like that if anybody ever has rode on a roller coaster or maybe on a Ferris wheel, I kind of felt like that feeling to where that like a Ferris wheel, that the plane would kind of drift off like this and going from higher latitude to lower latitude, and then that so far as turning it was, and in a lot of ways that with anybody is like to talk about, I'm like, that so far it's just like riding a bus, huh? But other than that you say with the airplane right here, and then you say besides riding on a Ferris wheel, and of course it's like the sound of the engine. It's like talk about but I can remember that the sound of the engine, that like if you'll be sitting right next to the engine, and a lot of times the engines sometimes are pretty loud too, but in a lot of ways that they say that with the doors too, whenever they get ready to prepare for takeoff, a lot of times that they seal the doors from the outside, and from the inside to the outside, and so that way that all the air, whichever it is, it's all sealed and locked in. It is. So whenever that the plane takes off, that don't have to worry about any loss of oxygen, whichever it is. But say so far as cabin pressure. But anyway, that going to close off right here. But so far I say with the aircrafts it is. But so far talking about with Matthews Told Aircraft, to talk about my experience, and like anybody with any kid, if they would wonder about what's it like getting on an airplane, it is. If anybody would say that just like what you call getting in the car, and I could say that. That more likely you probably won't be able to see as much, and I know more likely it's probably true that you won't be able to see that much between what you call is like between traveling by car, and then that traveling between traveling by automobile and traveling by aircraft, traveling doing air travel, it is that you would not be able to see very much if you were to be driving in a distance by automobile, it is, compared to say an aircraft that you may get to your destination much faster, compared to driving. But on the other hand, let's just say if you were driving through Phoenix, Arizona, or driving through parts of Texas, whichever it is, that more likely you may get more scenery. That it may be, you may have to get a hotel a couple of nights, it is, and then you may have to do a couple of rest stops. But with anybody who maybe think about between air travel and maybe doing any other type of travel, it is that they may say that's stressful, but on the other hand too, your experience about what you can see while you're traveling, like if it's the Rocky Mountains, or if it's it's like other parts, of course you say different parts, say the country and state, it is other parts of say of the city, the things that more likely that you could explore, and with anybody who maybe think about that, if this was related to a school assignment, if you don't know where to start, well, anybody probably think about, oh no, you know where to start. Just that, maybe you just don't know exactly about how to put it, as in, and this is all what I have to share. But I'm sure that there's some excitement so far as talking about stories from what we can remember about our experience about between traveling and, of course, knowing about going places it is. But on the other hand, to talk about, right here, so for the Matthews Told aircraft, it's like the aircraft, of course, I do, and knowing about this, like so far as, study about, with the airplanes, knowing about, from the childhood is, so far as Matthews Told aircraft coloring.